Well, good morning. And this sermon that you're listening to right now is for May 17th. And we started a family series starting with Mother's Day, and we're going to end that family series on Father's Day. And we have a passage of Scripture written by Solomon. Now, he knows a lot about family because he had a lot of family, although that doesn't necessarily make you a good family man. He had a lot of wives. But let's open our Bibles to Psalm 127. And we see here that this is called a Song of Ascents of Solomon. And it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain." When I was a young man, I was told the story of the three little pigs. And, there was the house of straw, and there was the house of sticks, and then there was the third pig who spent all this time putting up a brick house, and the wolf came and dispatched the previous two ones, but when he came to the brick house, he couldn't blow it down because the house was built more sturdily. And unless the Lord builds the house, or at least unless the house that you're involved in, your household, has the Lord as its basis, it's just not going to stand. It's not going to last. And so this is talking about the importance of the Lord in our lives. And he should be number one, and our life should be centered upon him. And so as a result, we're going to have a strong household. You leave the Lord out, and your efforts will eventually flop. It might look like everything is going well, and you're getting away with it. You haven't paid any attention to the Lord, but someday it's going to come home to roost, and everything is going to fall. As a matter of fact, this is what happened in the nation of Israel. Although it's after this time when this was written, Solomon's kingdom split, and his son Rehoboam had two kingdoms, and Jeroboam had two tribes, and Jeroboam had 10 tribes, and the northern 10 tribes were called Israel. Sometimes it's called Ephraim. And the southern two tribes were called Judah. And so this northern 10 tribes, they got to walking away from the Lord. And they built these kingdoms and different houses of kings, and kept being turnover. And even though there was Elijah and Elisha and Jonah, great prophets of God, although Jonah was rather reluctant, that didn't carry the day. And they didn't keep their eyes upon the Lord, and so God deported them and had that kingdom fall. The southern kingdom kept their eyes more on the ball and had more of the Lord, and they had the temple, although there were some awful kings, bad people in the line of David. It was just one house, and it didn't turn over wickedly like that from one house to another house to another house. And so it comes crashing down. And of course, that's about the nation of Israel and how they didn't keep the Lord central. But this is really also talking about a person, a man and his wife, and them building a home and raising a family. And the Lord needs to be central to that. And there's frankly not a lot of people who do that anymore. And if you keep the Lord number one in your home, you pray at dinner time, the Bible is read, you have spiritual values that you hold consistently in your home, you go to church, you go to conference, or you have Bible camp or vacation Bible school. Church seems to be the center of your home. This is how people seem to do it today, and they make the Lord number one in their lives and in their household. And that home is going to be a home that prospers. I'm not saying it doesn't have any problems, but even the problems that they have, they seem to deal with them much better. So, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. Now, one precaution I want to say here, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a watchman. You don't need a watchman. It doesn't say that. It says if the Lord isn't building the house, you labor in vain and stay awake in vain as a watchman, because it's going to fall. But it doesn't say don't have a watchman. So just keep that in mind. So the watchman keeps awake in vain. But you know, the Lord protects a city, the Lord protects a home. In verse 2, it says, it is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late. Now, why would you rise up early? And why would you retire late? Because you're doing work 24/7, wall to wall, and you think you're going to get ahead that way. But it says here, it's vain, and to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. The Lord adds an element to a home that is a blessing. The Israelites, when they went to bed at night, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and they didn't sow and they didn't reap, but they slept, and in the morning when they rose up, lo and behold, there was food on the ground. Now, they had to go out and pick it up. There was work and there was some effort. God didn't put the food on the kitchen table for them. He put it out on the ground and they had to go and collect it. But that happened while they were asleep. And God provided for them. And then God made it so that Israel, if they were working 6 days, the seventh day they could rest and they'd have enough food for that day. And the manna, they could collect 2 portions of manna on the 6th day, and then on the 7th day it would last through, it wouldn't rot and turn into worms. So the Lord was blessing them so that this was the way in which it went. And if you have the Lord in your life and you're trusting in him and you are working, but you're not working 24/7, you're not killing yourself, working your fingers to the bone and long hours trying to get ahead. But if you have the Lord and you're just working diligently, he will bless you and help you and enable you so that you will do well. So that is the number one thing, to have the blessing of God on your life by having the Lord as the foundation of your home. I've seen people say this house has been established 1991 or something, but it has the Lord in it, so that's a very, very strong home. Now, the second thing that is a blessing to a home, not only if the Lord builds a house, but it says here in verse 3, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. It's important for us to see children as a blessing. It is a grievous thing to me that people do not want their children and they abort them. And it's such a sad thing to have people sacrifice their children on the altar of economics, and it gets in the way of their life, or it's inconvenient, various such things like this. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. It's a gift. You go to some of these Eastern cultures, and they see children as a gift. And when they see that you only got 2 or 3 children, they think, oh, so you don't have the blessing of God on your life. you only have a couple children. And they think of you as being infertile. And basically, what we try to do is just have a couple children, 2 or 3 children. We don't try to have 7 or 8. And they think that as not the blessing of God. And maybe we need to start turning our minds to the fact that having more children is a gift and a blessing from the Lord. So, behold, the children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. So, a gift and a reward. You know, back at the time of the Bible, when this was written, women wanted desperately to have children. They wanted to have a lot of children. They desired that one of the possibilities of having a child would be that this could be an important child to save the world. And finally, it came along, and Mary had this child. And so, children are meant to be a blessing and a gift. You know, we have a mother who wants to have children. She marries. This past week was Mother's Day, and you have mothers who want to have children. And to have children, you're supposed to have a husband. I know there's such a thing as artificial insemination, but that's discounting the blessing that a husband is in a family and what he brings to the family. But we have this aspect, of course, where the man and the woman come together and they have a vested interest. I wanted to have a wife because I wanted to have a family. My wife wanted to have a husband because she wanted to have a family. That's how we did things. And so we get married and we start having children, and they're a blessing from the Lord. And when we have the child, we praise the Lord for the child coming into our home. So these children are a blessing. And these eternal beings are tremendous blessings to you. You know, you're on a journey of life, and you start having these little ones and little crumb munchers and little rug runners that are around your ankles, and just in scraps of time, you're training them and helping them, and oh no, don't eat that, and say please, say thank you, and you're just constantly training them, and you're helping them to grow up to be great, great blessings. You know, it says even in Luke 2:52 that when Jesus was lost and he was in the temple and they had to backtrack and finally found him in the temple, and he said, well, wouldn't you know, I'd have been about my Father's business. And they took him home with them, and it says he submitted himself to his parents, and he grew in favor with God and man and socially, and he grew physically. And so there are things that happen, and God entrusted Jesus, his son, into the hands of an ordinary man and woman, and he considered that to be very sufficient and godly training for his son. So a man and a woman dedicated to the Lord with all their little foibles, quirks. They're not perfect, they're sinners, but they work together and they raise their children, and it is sufficient. And God put his imprimatur blessing upon the family. He created the family, and he put the children into the family. And you know, I know that there are some families that are a bit dysfunctional. Every once in a while, you hear about horror stories of families, parents that fail their children. And so every once in a while, family around them have to step in and help. But they have this government agency and that government agency, and then this layer of government agency and that. And I have all of this, and it costs millions of dollars to handle just these few cases. But if you get a man and a woman that are committed to one another, they can do it cheaper, they can do it better. They are so much better than all of these other people that are trying to, in some way or another, replace the man and a woman. So it's genius. It's God's best plan. A man and a woman can do a family better than anything else. And it says here, it says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior. Now, a warrior is a military person, but it also is a person who's very skilled at shooting an arrow. And they take that arrow and they aim it, just a little correction this way or that way, and it'll hit the target. And that's a pretty good illustration of what you do with children. Just a little correction this way or that way, and you hit the target. You have things you want to do with your children. Say, son, don't say it that way, or that wasn't very kind, or this is how you treat a girl, or don't lie, or tell the truth. Stay on a task. This is how you work. This is the value of money. This is how you treat your neighbors. And you get these young people so that they're good, decent individuals. And when you get them raised up to the point where they're decent individuals contributing to society, you have a well aimed arrow. And so when it says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. You have these children and they're with you on your journey, and you're just giving little scraps of time here and there and making little corrections, and they have their blessings to you at that time. I mean, we get phone calls from our daughters and they're telling about their children and what cute thing they did today, and the amusing things that were happening, and their blessings along the way. And we're like sponges, just absorbing all of this information that they're telling us about the development of the children. And they're a blessing. But later on, it says here, how blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. He's got all of these adult children now that are good, sturdy citizens. They're honest individuals. They're part of society. And it says here, they will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. Well, why is it that they won't be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate? It's because they got all these children backing them up. It's because they're part of that city and part of that society. And they are going to be taking up the benefit and the needs of their parents, watching over their shoulders and helping them. Now, there's a passage of Scripture that I'd like for you to look at besides this passage right here in 127. And this 127, we want to leave it temporarily. I don't want to lose my spot, so I'm going to put myself there. And I'm going to take you to 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5. Now, this was a book that Paul wrote. He wrote it to Timothy, who was trying to get the Ephesian church straightened out. They had some problems. I have to quit talking and just find this passage. There we go. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, it talks about the order of widows. These were widows who needed to have the church help support them. And it says in verse 3, honor widows who are widows indeed. A widow is a woman who doesn't have her husband alive. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety and regard to their own family, and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. Now, what does that mean? They need to make a return to their parents. Their parents took care of them when they were little, and now their parents need them, and they should help take care of them when they're older and their parents are uh, aged and need some help. So they, our parents helped us when we were little, and we should help them when they're old. And that is the Christian duty that we have toward them. And then it talks about a widow who's a widow indeed. She doesn't have any children to help her. Now, if she was a widow and had children to help her, then they should help, they should learn to help that mother. And one of the problems that I have occasionally in the church is people will say to me, well, she's a widow and she needs help. And although we're willing to go in there and help a little bit, we can't keep doing that when it's the children that should do it, because they have a responsibility, according to this passage right here, to give some return to their parents. And it says here in verse 8, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So you see, the children that you raise in some way or another are kind of your true Social Security. Nobody's going to care about you like your children should care about you. And happy is a man whose quiver is full of them, and he is not going to be embarrassed at the gate, and he's going to have some backup. I know of people, I've had a lot of older people in the churches I pastor. I'm getting closer and closer to that definition myself. And these people get phone calls and they're trying to be scammed by people on the phone, and their relatives need to get in there and protect them because these people want to steal everything that they have, and they get disoriented and they need to be watched out for. Now, I remember my mother-in-law. She's not my mother, but I married her daughter, and she got to having, as a widow, she got to be having some problems. She had something that mimicked Parkinson's, but it wasn't Parkinson's, so it didn't respond to the medicine that they usually give for Parkinson's. And so she was getting stiff, and her joints weren't working as well, and she wasn't able to get up and down the steps at her house anymore, and she was starting to fall. And we took her to the doctor, and the doctor told her, well, no, she didn't have Parkinson's, and the medicine that they would give for Parkinson's wouldn't help her because that's not what she has. And she was going to become increasingly more stiff and difficult for her to get around. And so as we were there, both my wife and I, he was talking to us in the hall, and we told him that we wanted to take her into our home. And he said, do you have a strong marriage? Because it was going to stress us. And it's not something that I considered as an option. We wanted to bring her in. We wanted to help take care of her. We're the ones that loved her. And we wanted to do what we could for her as long as we were able. And it was our Christian duty. And so we brought her into our home. And so that's the things that you do. You watch out for them. It's our Christian responsibility. And so this is how God provides for you. First, you make him number one in your home, and you build your house with the Lord involved in it, and that's wonderful. We have here in the United States on our money, in God we trust. We have in the American flag, one nation under God. We have in our preamble that we are created with certain inalienable rights. That's wonderful too. But the government isn't really a Christian government. It just has people in it that are Christians. And if you want to have a home that is built upon the Lord, you have to do it yourself. You can't think, oh, we got it on our money, we have it in our pledge, we have it in our preamble. No, you have to take it and put it in your home. And so when you put it in your home and you have that foundation, you're supposed to be responsible. You're supposed to be a watchman, and you're supposed to be careful and work. But you don't have to work yourself to the bone, because God is going to take care of you and even bless you in your sleep. But also, God blesses you by giving you children. They're a reward. And you raise them in your scraps of time. They're just around you, and you're correcting them. You're helping them become decent human beings. And then that comes back upon you. And ultimately, they are kind of like your Social Security, and they've got your back, and they watch over you because you took care of them when they were helpless. And there comes a time when they need to take care of you when you're helpless. And so this is how one hand washes another, and God intends for children to be a blessing to the Lord. So, first of all, have children. Let them be a blessing and see them that way. And secondly, if you are someone with aged parents, you learn to take the responsibility that you need to have to watch over your parents. And I know that sometimes there's some children that are more inclined to take care of the parents than others. But I've also seen some children that just practically abandon wanting to help their parents in any way. And I'm here to tell you that's a dereliction of the Christian duty. So children are a blessing to the Lord. You take care of them when you're little, they're little, and they take care of you when you're old. God's blessing upon you. See God's plan here. The children are a blessing to the Lord.